Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com. I am making this video as a response to the user ADKPINECONE. His name's Sam, and he's posted a whole slew of several dozen comments on my most recent video, the one right before this. I'm making this as a video response to my last video because he didn't make a video response to my video, which I asked him to do with his most recent video. And he was basically responding to the video, but he wasn't wanting to make it as a video response for some reason. But I want you guys to see it if you want, so I've got the link below in the info section. But I just wanted to have this video as an adjunct to my last video, so anyone watching that one who sees the insane amount of comments that were posted there, that I'm obviously not going to spend the time responding to each one, as they were a bit repetitive, and I'd much rather do it in video format so that you guys get the benefit of seeing it and learning from it. So I enjoyed this user's channel in the past. I even made a video where I recommended his channel to people. I would definitely retract that statement in the future, because in light of this situation he's been fairly rude to me on several occasions and hasn't been all that emotionally stable in his responses. Making a lot of sort of personal judgments and conclusions before actually getting around to discussing the matters. So with the process of any sort of debate or comparing evidence for things, science is supposed to be based in very cold, you could almost say, and almost like heartless and soulless. That sounds kind of uncharacteristic of something you'd want to be involved in, but it's the idea that when you're applying science or looking at research or anything like this, you want to be as unbiased as possible. And so when you get emotionally involved in any topic to the point where you get a little hysterical in proclaiming your beliefs in that research, then that really sort of off-balances any response you have to incoming evidence, so you can't see things from an outside perspective. So that's one of my biggest things I focus on when talking with people online or doing research, is to stay neutral about things. And yes, I develop an opinion about things, but I'm not trying to bash people over the head with it, as you see with some health motivators. And there's, in my view, a certain amount of emotional imbalance that comes from certain types of diets that people follow, which sort of creates this fervor in them to spread it in such a way that they're very harsh in their words and in their delivery. So to start off with, we're going to address some of the comments that ADKPINECONE left that were in regards to some of the past civilizations and sort of very broad population accounts of diet and the results they were getting. And then we'll get more into sort of the scientific basis for my stance on things and sort of clear up the twisted information he put out there in terms of sort of saying I'm being contradictory when I wasn't at all in the video. So one of the first things he brought up in one of his comments was in reference to Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan being such great conquerors, and their armies were fed on very high starch carb diets. And that to me doesn't state anything. That's just, when you have a massive army and you're a conqueror, you need to feed them, and you need to be able to get them to a point of winning the battles. Feeding them a diet that contains large amounts of animal foods, or even small amounts of animal foods, is very expensive for the army leaders. So obviously they're going to go for the cheapest solution, and yes, high carbohydrate foods can definitely give someone the energy when they're breaking it down. But we're not going to see longevity in the people that were in the army there. We're not going to see great health in terms of long-term sustainable health. And using that as an example doesn't mean anything. It's not even connected to the actual topic of balding. So there's a lot of points that Samuel brought up that are getting very off topic, because it becomes a sort of high carbohydrate versus low carbohydrate type battle, which you see a lot in various places on the internet. And so this video might seem like it's kind of focused on that, but I will keep touching into that topic of hair loss, because my stance was that we want to stay low carb if we, as an aspect of whole lifestyle factors that we might want to engage in to help return hair growth or slow it down or stop it if we're losing our hair. And just watch the main video if you want to learn more about that and the reasons why I said that. But I'll also touch on that near the end of the video. So the next point that Samuel brought up was in regards to veganism being in the Bible before the descent of man. And while I totally respect anyone's religious beliefs, when we're talking about science and something like diet, we just have to look at the facts, and this is fictional writings in a book that has no basis in any actual evidence. If we look at the anthropological evidence, humans have consumed flesh, whether it's from insects, rodents, small game, large game, for over 70 million years. That, some people might think, is an extraordinary claim, but if we go back 2.5 million years when humans first started, so at this point where we could say in the fossil record that exists that humans began, that's when we were considered Homo erectus. We were eating the majority of our diet as flesh food. The progress to that whole 2.5 million years was what's known as the Paleolithic era, and that diet was very high in animal foods in some cases, and at some points it was entirely flesh foods. So we lived for periods of time, according to fossil evidence, both the coprolite, which is fossilized feces evidence, as well as the carbon dating on the teeth, or the carbon analysis of the food remains on the teeth, that our diet at times was entirely meat-based. So there's no denying this. There's no debate in the anthropological community about this. So, you know, some people in the vegan community still are opposed to that just because they have that sort of paradigm that they're coming from, and that's fine. I'm going to do a series, as I mentioned, and I have mentioned on several occasions, but I mentioned in the comments to Samuel, I'll be doing a series probably around video number 300. I'll start posting it because I'm still doing lots of research on it, and if you want all the scientific links to the articles in medical journals and online that show this evidence of humans eating this way, I'll have that in those videos. I obviously have time constraints for getting this video up, and I'm not going to be posting a whole slew of links related to that because it's readily available if you just start doing some searches on the topic. So prior to that, for about 60 million years, we were through various stages of our ancestors' development, and these were pre-humans, so technically I don't think we need to look at them for dietary basis because we've changed so much since then, and at 2.5 million year mark, in terms of how many years ago when we became humans, that really sort of set the stage for what we are now and what we should be eating. But again, that 60 million year span before that, there's a variety of species. One of them was Australopithecus, that was sort of the main one, and in the past they thought the species was vegan, if not vegetarian, perhaps eating some insects and eggs. But it is now clear with, again, carbon analysis on the teeth, that they were eating meat on a fairly regular basis, albeit not in any large quantity. So it was definitely an omnivorous species, and the other human-like or ape-like ancestors of ours during that 60 million year time span were also eating small amounts of game, such as rodents, probably small reptiles, anything they could catch with their hands. And later on, before humans, they were starting to use tools before we were humans even. So, again, we were never vegetarian, we were never vegan, and 70 million years ago when we were sort of like these cross between a monkey and an ape, still probably living in trees, we were entirely insectivore. So even before that, ranging back to 100 million years, we were insectivore, and that would have been a digestive tract that was suited for eating high fat, high protein. And then of course there was that span of time where we did develop the digestive tract to be more omnivorous, because we were eating some berries and fruits, the few that were available in the South African area at that time, or the African savanna, and there were some grasses and nuts and seeds that had to be chewed up quite well with the very wide, sturdy jaws we had at the time, and our jaws have shrunk considerably since then because of our animal food consumption, which is much softer and requires less chewing. So that point is kind of a moot point again. You can believe what you want in terms of religion, but when it crosses into making claims about scientific history, it's pretty sketchy and very pseudoscientific. So, I mean, you can counter this if you want with some sort of evidence of the flood happening or whatnot, but it's just not accepted mainstream. It's not even accepted less than mainstream. It's only within that little paradigm of Christianity, which is unfortunately not a science. Another, I'd say, good point that Sam brought up was that Bernardo La Paulo, the 110-year-old, mostly raw foodist, he's been featured on a few YouTube videos in the past year or two, and one of the most notable ones was the interview with Paul Neeson. You can always go to Paul Neeson's site, another sort of religious, overzealous character that I've made video responses to in the past, and his channel, that interview is on there. Other interviews, Bernardo didn't go into his diet as much, and some people have the misinformation thinking that he is a raw vegan, perhaps eating some cooked food, but being vegan, but he is actually not. In the interview with Paul Neeson, he does say he eats fish several times a week, and he eats lamb on holidays, so that's several times a year. So yes, it's a low animal product diet, but he's not vegan by any means, and again, this guy has very good genetics. Anyone that's familiar with looking at the longest lived people in North America would note that in the US, if you were to look at the top 10 longest lived people over the past dozen or so years, there's an abnormally large amount of them of African ancestry. And I mean black ancestry. Obviously we're all of one point or another from Africa, but the idea that black people have really good genetics is for longevity is true, and so do the Polish. And Brian Clement of the Hippocrates Health Institute does recognize that about 80% of the centenarians that come through there, when he meets them, that's the first thing he notices, is that about 80% of them are either black or Polish. And for some reason these two groups have very good genetics for longevity. However, over time, as the generations do descend into sort of a more Western diet with a lot more processed foods, sugar, junk, etc., they lose that genetic integrity. So the most recent generations of both black people and Polish people in North America would be losing that trait. But Bernardo, being 110, obviously has great genetics, and while I think diet is very important and he eats very well, he's also a highly spiritual person. He walks every day, he has a very great outlook on life, and there's just so many factors that make for his great longevity. And there's plenty of examples of long-lived people who are doing diets much higher in animal foods that live longer than him or have lived just as long as him or lived to be 100. So one little example of someone living a long time on a raw food vegan diet or close to that is not basis by any means. One of the next points that Sam brings up is saying the brain runs on glucose, and we can make glucose from protein should we need to do that. We convert protein over to that. However, even if we're on a ketogenic diet and we have low enough carbohydrates in the diet that our body switches over to making ketones, our brain runs fine on ketones. There's really no reason to fear running on ketones. That's something I'll cover in greater depth in my series again, because that's going to have all the explanations and research should you wish to look that up. He then goes on to say that the gladiators of the past were barley men, and they were very strong, and they were apparently vegan. We don't have evidence that they were 100% vegan, but if you check the link below, I've got the first link I have to a reference is that, first of all, they were overweight, and this was done on purpose so that they would put on fat that protects them in the ring, so that if they were sliced or stabbed, it wouldn't immediately sever a muscle, sever a tendon, puncture an internal organ, and cause them to die quicker than they would otherwise if they had a lot of fat on them. So even with this point that Sam brought up, he's kind of showing that the high-carb diet is good for putting on fat and isn't healthy if that's all you're eating. I mean, it must be mentioned that they'd be eating a large amount of carbohydrates, just like sumo wrestlers do, to put on body fat. And, for example, sumo wrestlers eat only 16% of their calories from fat. The rest is rice. And obviously they eat vegetables, but that's not going to be a significant portion of their calories. They eat tons of rice, just like the gladiators were eating tons of barley and perhaps some other grains. And they were even so deficient in calcium that they had to eat wood ash to get extra calcium to build their bones. And this was evidence in the writings. So they might have done some pictorial depictions of the gladiators being a little more trim than they were, but according to the bone evidence and the stress and the formation of the bones, it's obvious to the archaeologists that these people were overweight. It can be shown through the stress on the bones, and it just makes sense when they were eating such a diet that they would want to have that fat for that purpose, like I mentioned. Plus it's very vascularized. Fat is vascularized, so you cut it and it's going to be bleeding, and it's a better show for the audience. The gladiators were prisoners, so they were spared expensive foods that would have been reserved for the higher class, such as the animal foods. And they know that their diet was based on grains, fruit, and beans. Sam's next point is that all large populations that have been successful have been on high-starch diets. And again, this is post-agriculture. That's when humanity switched to the high-grain diet and suffered as a consequence. You can throw out as many quotes as you want in regards to this culture eating corn, being successful. They're successful in the sense that they lived and they prospered for a time. But again, if we look to paleontology, and I'm going to cover this in the future series with the references, it's clear that, number one, humans' brains shrank when they began eating a high-carbohydrate diet. That's going from hunter-gatherer groups to agriculturalists. Their stature shrank, so their bones literally shrunk. They became more osteoporotic. Osteoporosis doesn't exist in hunter-gatherers. Their musculature shrank, as well as their brains, and that's because of the skull shrinking, as well as the fat content and cholesterol content in the diet not feeding the creation of the brain. And lifespan shortened, and we know this for a fact that at the start of agriculture, people were living to mid-20s, 30s, 40s tops. Once in a while, someone would live to be a long time, but overall, it's because of a number of reasons, but the grain-based diet is a big one. And obviously nowadays, we live so long because of a variety of reasons, such as the crisis care that we have. So when someone breaks a bone or injures themselves, they're not going to die from an infection like a hunter-gatherer would without acute hospitalization to treat those kinds of injuries. And the diseases we suffer from today are a result of the metabolic syndrome, which has without question been connected with the high carbohydrate diet. Of course, the processed carbohydrates in Western culture and throughout the developing world are worse, but it still goes to show that even on the whole foods, whole grain, first diets that came out of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, which is not but a blink of an eye in our evolutionary past, that these people did live shorter than the hunter-gatherers. And any hunter-gatherers that they looked at since then, often they skewed the results of their lifespan a bit by including the high rates of death at birth, and specifically with the records of carbon dating on skeletons, they can only look at a skeleton as being up to 35 years of age. So anything beyond that, they can't tell the age because it's impossible to determine because the bones have stopped growing. Hey, we'll get back to the main topic of this video in just one moment. I wanted to let you know, however, that if you're really enjoying this video, or perhaps you're a regular subscriber, and you'd like to see me continue making regular postings on this channel, Secrets of Longevity, or perhaps even increase the frequency of these postings, of these well-researched videos, and even the articles on my site, I would really appreciate any contribution you're able to make to support me through any of the affiliate links listed below. There's a menu bar that you simply click and it pops down. If you're watching this on another platform other than YouTube, you can double-click this video and it'll take you to YouTube, where you can then click this bar that will pop down to give you these links. So like I mentioned, there's affiliate links. These are all companies I highly recommend and purchase for myself. and I get a percentage of anything that you purchase through these links, and that obviously would support me. And then there's also a link to a donation page on my site where you can make a PayPal donation, and you can also set up a phone consultation if that's something you're interested in doing. So with that, we're going to get back to the video, and thank you for any support you're able to give to me. So the media and mainstream thought around this, and specifically the Hobbesian idea of hunter-gatherer life being short, brutish, and unpleasant, is just simply incorrect. We know that certain evolutionary traits got passed on, such as menopause. We wouldn't see menopause if there wasn't a reason for that to occur, and that means that people were living to 50 plus as hunter-gatherers. And I've got the second link below as an example of a long-lived hunter-gatherer. It's just one example I know, but it does happen. This is Chief Seattle from a Native American group that was eating a hunter-gatherer diet, and their diet was based on fish, berries, meat, greens like fiddleheads, sometimes nuts and seeds if they're in season like the acorn, etc. And they didn't have grain. Perhaps they had a little bit of squash here and there when it was in season, and that was largely the case for all of Native American culture. Before agriculture came over with the Europeans and got introduced to them, they were eating a Paleolithic / primal diet, high in fat, high in protein. And that being said, they did even have some farming before the Europeans came over, and specifically in some of the more South American cultures they were already growing corn and lots of those other things. But again, that started around 10,000 years ago, roughly, give or take 1,000 years or two. And again, these are modern additions to the diet that were not done in the past 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago plus. Sam's next point was that he gave a bunch of names of some teachers in the sort of raw vegan community, Dr. Brian Clement, Joel Fuhrman, Dr. McDougall, Duran Ryder, Douglas Graham, David Wolfe, and others. And his point was that they must be wearing wigs if they're promoting a high carbohydrate diet and not being bald. So I'm starting to get the picture that Sam completely misconstrued my original point with my video, and this is one factor that I'm recommending for people, along with a whole host of other lifestyle factors, to help return hair or slow the hair loss process down. And in no way have I said at any point that a high carbohydrate diet will cause you to lose hair. That there's a very strong genetic component to that. And that being said, he was also bringing up the fact that I don't have hair loss and I don't have it in my family. I don't think I ever even said whether I have it in my family or not. My mother's father doesn't have balding to a large degree happening, so no, I'm not immediately predisposed to it. But having it anywhere in your family does increase your risk for it, and I have my mom's brother has a lot of balding. My grandmother's father had balding. My father's mother on the other side had balding in her family, and there's other relatives of mine in my extended family who have balding occurring. But yes, I'm not directly at risk of it from that sense, and I have fairly thick hair, and I'm thankful for that, and I'm doing these things that I mentioned in my video just as precautions anyway, except I'm not putting olive oil in my hair every day. But basically the genetic factor is that your scalp is more sensitive to DHT. So it's, again, these people, these raw food leaders who aren't balding and are eating high carbohydrates, just because they're eating that way doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly start losing their hair. I haven't said that in my video anywhere. On top of that, two of the people he mentioned, Dr. Joel Fuhrman and Dr. Doug Graham, are balding. They're not, completely bald on top in 360 degrees like some people reach. But they are quite far along, and we simply don't know how things would have been had they followed a different dietary path for the sort of early to mid parts of their lives, and if that would give them any different results. Largely, I think they could have probably, in my opinion, prevented that. And then the other point is Dr. Brian Clement. He's simply not eating a high carbohydrate diet. Neither is David Wolfe. So again, there's two other names in there that are a little silly to add in there, and that pretty much rounds up. There's a few other names. I mean, Duran Ryder, he's a young guy, and he's following the exact diet Doug Graham is, and Doug Graham's mostly bald, so obviously Darian Ryder has great genetics for keeping his hair. Or maybe he's going to start losing it at some point, who knows. But that was never my point, that just eating carbohydrates are going to cause hair loss in everyone who's eating high carbohydrates. Someone else pointed out that, Dr. Mercola, who is eating a high-fat, higher protein diet, does have hair loss, and they were sort of saying that to me as a response to me responding to that one comment. And Dr. Mercola was eating a high carbohydrate diet in the past, and he's outspokenly said that he believes that this is why he experienced hair loss, and then he switched over to a higher fat, higher protein diet. And in my opinion, if you look at his videos from when he first began teaching stuff online, which was right when he had started consuming higher fat, higher protein foods, or a more animal food-based diet, he looks much healthier now. He looks great, in my opinion, because he's got a better exercise program, he's got a better diet, he's got a whole host of lifestyle measures that he follows. Sort of an all-encompassing point that Sam keeps coming back to is this idea that these certain areas of the world, like in Asia and even the Native Americans, they were eating high carbohydrate diets and they were not balding. First of all, Native Americans don't have the balding gene at all, and there's never Native Americans, unless they have European blood mixed into them, that experience balding. So they can eat whatever they want, and they won't bald unless they're completely starved of nutrients that their hair falls out. And same in Asia, they have a much lower rates of balding, but they do have it as well to some degree, but it's the Native Americans that don't have any genes related to balding. But in Asia, they simply have less of these genes, so no matter what they're eating, if it's traditional and whole food based, they're seeing the same rates. What they do see, and you were quoting in Japan, when after World War II, their diet became higher fat and higher in salt and higher in processed foods, they started balding quicker. And again, let's look at all of the lifestyle factors. Number one, they just had 2 nuclear bombs dropped on them. There's a high level of toxicity in the area, and overall, things are getting more toxic in the country. Number 2, they're eating a whole wide range of processed foods coming over. It's higher fat, but it's higher in fats that I wouldn't even recommend eating. We know that Ancel Keys, he's been sort of completely debunked at this point with his 7-nation study. There was data available for 22 countries, and he handpicked 7 to try to prove his theory that cholesterol in the diet increases heart disease, and it simply does not. It's easily shown with the data from that time period he had available that if he had included places like Switzerland, other places in Europe, and a variety of other countries, that it would have totally offset his data. So he only picked these 7 places, one of them was Japan, to try and show that the Japanese with lower cholesterol had lower rates of heart disease, as well as same thing with some areas in Greece, whereas other areas of the world had higher animal product consumption, had higher heart disease. But again, there's a variety of lifestyle factors at play, and the funny thing is that that same research that was done in Japan showing low heart disease with low fat after World War II, and as fat consumption began to rise through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, when I think is when they revisited the data, they had less heart disease with more cholesterol. And regardless of whether there was hair loss or not, if we're looking at what actually matters with health, the higher fat diet, obviously, which included milk at that point, was starting to give them protective benefits against heart disease, against stroke. And if you want more of that kind of information, you just have to look up Ancel Keys' work. You can read Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes, and there's plenty of information out there if you want to learn more about that. So the Native Americans simply didn't eat a high carbohydrate diet. They did have carbohydrates. I'm not trying to say they didn't eat squash and these other things. They didn't eat beans and grains and these other things you were saying until the Europeans came over. I've got a third link that's below this video. It kind of gives you an overview of Native American diet. It includes below it other areas of North American natives and their diet, so getting down into Central American, even down into the Andes, the Andean natives. And parts of them, especially down closer to the equator, they were eating higher carbohydrates because they were eating potatoes and more tubers. But the Native Americans, all across the northern area and even throughout the U.S., were eating much higher fat and protein than the carbohydrate content in their diet. And, you know, they didn't have that genetic component, so of course they weren't balding, but they still had great health, as we see from Chief Seattle living to 85. And that's, again, is one example, but when the Europeans came over, who were eating more of an agricultural diet, they had a much shorter lifespan, and there's writings that validate that as well, if you look into it. So Sam keeps saying that I'm afraid of carbohydrates. I'm not afraid of a food. People often say certain people that are recommending low fruit are afraid of fruit. That's not the case. It's based in results that people are getting, and some people do better on a lower carbohydrate diet, and so that's the recommendation. It's cause and effect. It's not we have a stigma about these types of foods. And the same thing could be said for the people that are afraid of fat. You know, I respect their experience, personal experience, that they feel better in the short term with lower fat and can do certain athletic endeavors with greater improvement for the short term on a low-fat diet. But when it comes to long-term results, personally I don't see a very strictly low-fat diet being beneficial at all. But that's another topic that I've covered in past videos, of course. So this idea of fear of carbohydrates is simply based on the science that I come across, the science that other people come across, and the whole idea of eating low fruit. And I have never said no fruit, which you're saying or insinuating that I'm saying. I eat several servings of fruit a day. I'm focused on the antioxidant-rich, more natural fruits like wild blueberries, strawberries. Obviously strawberries aren't as similar as they were in the wild, but they're closer to that than, say, pineapple, which doesn't exist in any form in the wild, or bananas, as the form that it is now today. And then I also advocate plenty of vegetable consumption and other plant foods that would fall into the category of non-sweet fruits or sweeter vegetables. So I feel that you've, to some degree, misinterpreted what I'm saying, and I'd encourage you to pay closer attention to future videos. And then you're going into saying that I'm contradicting myself, and again, you didn't listen closely enough, which is a little bit irritating because I'm just having to waste my time clarifying something that's already said before. It just takes a bit of keen observation, Sam, if you want to sort of figure these things out. But it seems like you're trying to look for things to sort of vilify me here. But I was saying that a very high protein diet is not healthy, yet at the same time I was saying that high protein doesn't affect the kidneys like most people think it does. So first of all, I'm saying that ancestrally we ate a higher fat diet than protein. So our protein wasn't above 20-30% of the overall calories. It just wasn't the main source of calories that our ancestors got, because yes, the animals in Africa were leaner than our modern hybridized cattle and other things that have a lot of marbling in the flesh, even when they're eating grass. So if you think of the fat content of an antelope, it's got very little intramuscular fat, but it has more subcutaneous fat. And as an animal ages, it gets more fat on the back, and of course our ancestors ate the brains, the organs, and the bone marrow, and that is all very high fat. So all in all, we were always eating a high fat diet. We were simply not eating a lean protein diet, which is sort of what the paleo contingency that Lauren Cordain recommends, which he still sort of has that diet heart hypothesis that fat causes heart disease, and so he's recommending a lower fat diet that's still rich in animal foods, but just very, very lean animal foods and no dairy, which is higher in fat too. So with that being said, I'm more of the camp that Mark Sisson talks about, and people like the Archivore. He's got a blog, great blog if you want to search that name, Archivore, A-R-C-H-E-V-O-R-E. This idea that fat is bad has been clearly debunked for a long time. Again, I said it all based in Ancel Keys's work, and it's been pushed forward by a number of other major epidemiological studies, but at their root they were flawed, and the ongoing research has showed that they were flawed, but they've already came out with the results, and so they can't go back on themselves because of the publicity problems that that would create. So be sure to get my points right. I am recommending a higher fat diet with animal foods, which you will get the protein, you'll get plenty of protein to build hair and nails, but it won't be so high that it would be causing possible problems. One of them is protein converting to glucose in the blood and being stored as fat, which does occur, and there are a lot of byproducts from using protein for fuel, and while it's not hard on the kidneys in that sense, it is obviously going to put on body fat. So when you're focused on fat and you're going into ketosis, which is how we evolved to being, which I'll go into detail in future videos, you can see that you've just misinterpreted what it was I was saying in the first place. So connected to that is this idea that Chinese medicine, which I referred to in the first video about hair loss, Chinese medicine says sweet foods can exacerbate hair loss. So what I was saying was that grains, beans, and fruits would fall under the sweet category, and so we need to eat less of them, and specifically get rid of all the grains and legumes and eat a moderate amount of fruit. And then I also mentioned that dairy and meat is sweet base, according to this Chinese medicine flavor of the internal digestion. But I was saying get rid of the dairy because it helps convert testosterone to DHT in the body. And I was saying that meat, and I said this very clearly, and again, you misinterpreted me here, that meat is a sweet food, but less of one. It's not as strong in terms of its sweet quality as beans, grains, and these other insulin-spiking foods. And that was the overall overarching point of the diet portion of that video, was that the primal diet, slash paleo, whatever you want to call it, the sort of diet our ancestors ate, was low in carbohydrates, and that kept insulin from being too active in the body and prevented it from exacerbating hair loss. But you can check those links below for the part where I talk about and give links for how insulin clearly is a factor in hair loss. So the idea with the Chinese medicine philosophy isn't to completely eliminate sweet foods. What I was relating to was the standard American diet, which is high in, yes, meat, but also dairy, the starchy carbs, the grains, the potatoes, the french fries, the soda. All of these things are exacerbating the sweet flavor. We need some of it, and I'm proposing a primal-based diet where that is meat, and if you're having hair loss, then you wouldn't consume the dairy. But eliminating those other things is the bulk of the sweet quality that is going to exacerbate those problems. Again, Sam's criticizing some of my choice of using examples, and that goes to show that individual examples of health are not what we could call evidence. And this is specifically my friend's mother, who went to an ashram in India and was eating a cooked vegan diet, and all of her hair fell out over the course of several months, and she ended up having to literally leave against the ashram's guru's orders and go sneak some eggs and chicken from the market, and her hair started to grow back at that point. You know, that's just my story I'm sharing from someone that I know, and that's all I'm asking you to take it for. I'm not saying that everyone that eats a vegan diet is going to lose their hair that way. That's one person who obviously had a need for some animal-based foods that experienced problems on the high-starchy vegan diet. You also went into the idea of saw palmetto. Probably my viewers are starting to get the point at how ridiculous your sort of ongoing remarks were, considering how much time I'm putting into responding to this. I do want people to learn, for those who will stick through this, and I want you to learn, Sam, that you got to provide actual evidence when you're making any kind of statement, and I'm willing to do that. Are you willing to? Let's see the video response. So the idea that saw palmetto that I was recommending against consumption, I wasn't debating that it can slow down hair loss or prevent it or reverse it in men. That's obviously a fact. Like, you saw me list off what testosterone converts into, and yes, saw palmetto blocks DHT, but it leaves the other two avenues open for free testosterone to be kept low. that, in my opinion, is not desirable because you want to stay testosterone dominant. You do not want to become estrogen dominant, which is what will happen if you consume a lot of saw palmetto. So with certain characteristics I see in you, I definitely look at perhaps bringing down the estrogen levels because that will cause certain characteristics to come through that are undesirable for any male. Nettle root, in my opinion, is better because it blocks off all three of those avenues of sex hormone binding globulin, estradiol, and DHT, and free testosterone being converted to any three of those. And so that allows free testosterone to rise up, and it blocks off the DHT, which potentially could be causing hair loss. And it also blocks off those other two so that you're keeping the testosterone high to maintain male characteristics. One of your first posts was recommending me look at Dr. Clapper's work, and you gave some quotes from him, and it was clear that he was saying that high-fat diets increase testosterone levels, and that will increase testosterone converting to DHT. And again, you could simply block this with nettle root or any other herb of your choice that will block that conversion. If you don't mind becoming estrogen dominant and bitchy, whiny, slightly feminized. And right in the words there, the explanation is right there. You become testosterone dominant, which is a good thing, but one result is a hair loss, so you just want to block off the DHT conversion. Testosterone dominance is not a bad thing in and of itself, so the problem, again, it's with that conversion. It's not the animal foods, it's not the fat. One of the biggest problems in our society today is with each successive generation, we're seeing 20 years apart, we're seeing approximately 20% drop in testosterone levels. So this is something we want to maintain. If we want to maintain our libido, our fertility, our masculinity, and these other factors that are going to be important for furthering the human genome and keeping it intact and strong. One more point about the Japanese and that reference to before World War II, which Dr. Clapper was also talking about. The biggest factor which has been shown through research was the taking up of smoking by such a widespread amount of Japanese. And this lifestyle factor increases your risk of hair loss. So again, there's many factors. It's not just dietary based. And with the Japanese, they were eating processed foods, not strictly a diet that we could say is similar to a primal diet, which is what I'm recommending here. And you're drawing a conclusion and a comparison that does not fit. So again, my overarching idea of the diet portion of the video was that a carbohydrate-based diet increases your need for your body to secrete insulin into the bloodstream, which then can exacerbate hair loss. So the fourth and fifth links below clearly show the connection that people with male pattern baldness, both males and females, so and specifically women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome who tend to be prone to hair loss, because they have elevated insulin, it's been directly connected with hair loss, and the consensus on this is agreed that the insulin raises both insulin as well as the accompanying growth factors, and this interacts with the hair follicle and can induce balding in those who are sensitive to it. So, obviously a high carbohydrate diet that's high in junk food carbohydrates is not good, but you're still releasing various degrees of insulin with more whole food based carbohydrates, and some people that go on that do still gain weight. And if you're gaining weight, you're doing that because you're having insulin secreted. And so we can also know that we need to avoid that type of a diet if we're very prone to baldness. So the reason I make that recommendation is because some people do have a lot of genetic predisposition to balding, and so they need to take a wide, whole lifestyle approach to this. Taking just the hair massage and perhaps just the oil might not cut it. So they do have to add in the herbs, the diet, and the whole thing that I mentioned in my video to directly bring back their chances of hair loss occurring. So with the evidence on the table, we can clearly see that animal foods don't cause a problem for hair loss when they're in the forms that I've mentioned are ideal for health, such as grass-fed, etc. And obviously we're not looking at a junk food diet, which is what you're referring to when you talk about the Japanese and other groups that aren't suffering or start to suffer hair loss after the introduction of those. So definitely look over what I've posted, make a response if you wish. I would like to notify my viewers that I have recommended people check out your channel in the past. It's obviously not something I feel like doing anymore. I think it's unfortunate you took such a strong, harsh, almost jabbing-like approach to bringing up these issues. Someone that doesn't have an emotional involvement with their dietary paradigm or whole lifestyle paradigm doesn't feel a need to block someone just for me responding. And throughout this I've been very to the point and clear with you that there's certain things you were engaging in that were inappropriate that I asked you to change, and you did change those. Perhaps you're not even going to watch this video at this point because you've blocked me on YouTube, and that's whatever. I didn't block you for writing 20 plus comments on my page, one after the other, even when they were verging on personal attack and pointing out conclusions that I wasn't making. So if you do watch this, definitely consider it, and I look forward to a response if you're integrous enough to do that. So with that being said, take care and embrace life without limits.